All right, so we have a few things to cover before I get into this. There is no quiz this week. In case you did see my announcement, there's no quiz this week, but starting next week, there will be a quiz that will cover basically the course material for the week prior. Quizzes will be small, very short, 10 questions. Hopefully nick them off in like 5 minutes or less, so they don't take up too much time. But the idea is we're going to try a new method of basically constantly reinforcing the topic over and over again through a weekly quiz and a weekly lab. Both things very small, very chunked. Okay? In fact, if you show up to class, the cool thing about it is you will complete half the lab during class. Guaranteed, every time, because I'm going to break the lab into 2 parts. I'm going to break the lecture into 2 parts, which means you will be guaranteed to have at least half your lab done before you leave for class, like before you leave. And then the rest of it's due on Sunday, so by midnight. And there's only 10 steps at any point. There'll only ever be 10 steps. And that's not 10 steps with A, B, C, right? Like 1A, 1B, 1C. I mean 10 steps total. 10 things that I'll ask you to do, and that is it. Otherwise, it'll be 8. Between 8 and 10 is usually. All right. And it won't be things like, hey, build this game, or build this game, or build this game, because I think that's caused a lot of problems. I think it's the logic, because now you're trying to learn this concept, as well as try to apply logic to the concept. And I think the 2 things don't want to mesh together. Some people love that. They love that challenge. And if that's the case and you're one of those people and you don't want to do the lab, you would rather challenge yourself with something more advanced, just come see me and say, hey, man, I want to build this instead. Can I do that? And will you mark it and give me the point for the lab? Yes, I will definitely do that. So I'm hoping to cover the range. The people who are struggling a little bit, help them catch back up to everybody else. Those who still want to advance and go forward and take that time to learn something new, I want to also help you as well. All right? So that's the idea there. I want to talk a little bit about the very alarming midterm that we just had. Because it's such a range, and I will say this, it's kind of a combination of a you and me thing, I think, that's caused a lot of the problems and the reason why we have the marks to what they are. Let me just pull it up. I just need my notes for it. Let's see here. Feedback. Everything's not open when I ask them to. Ah, there we go. Yeah, it's on the screen. That's all. All right, I'm going to make this a little bigger. Cool. All right, so a couple of things about the midterm. When I went through, I noticed a lot of the mistakes that were made were kind of green. Like they were kind of green mistakes. Do you know what I mean when I say green? Like if you're a contractor, for example, and you have a guy who's never done the job before and he comes on, you call him green, right? It's kind of the same idea. It's a little green. I only use the term green, meaning that some of the mistakes I kind of thought would have been covered in your other classes, like Intro to Programming, or you would have learned it in Java. Things like zero-indexed arrays. I was really surprised at the sheer number of people that didn't understand that arrays are zero-indexed. That was a bit alarming. And I know we had talked about it, but one of them was this. So I think this was a combination of my wording and how you interpreted it versus what I actually meant. So what I did is I was very, very, very fair. I was like, you know what, Sean, you likely fucked up in the way you worded it. It was difficult for them to understand what you meant. So as long as you used these modifier words, var, let, and const, and it made sense the way you used it, even those of you that wrapped it in a function or wrapped it in an if statement, I gave you the mark. I just gave it to you, okay? But what I was actually asking for was this. A global variable has no visual modifier, right? No scoping modifier whatsoever, right? Global is global. Global is global. Global is global. Which means if I set X in one file, it is available in every single document from that point on. They all have visibility to X. If I define X inside a function, it's available throughout the document, even though it was defined in the function. If I define it in an if condition, doesn't matter. X is available globally throughout our application. If I want to scope X, so it's only available within a function, I need to add var, right? Var is a functional scoping modifier. var is generally not used very much anymore. A lot of newer JavaScript programmers and those that work with Node and stuff are starting to dump var. They're not even using it anymore. Most use the next two, which is let and const. They're the two that tend to get most commonly used. Let is block scoped, and block scope is kind of an interesting concept because block scope is basically anything between these guys, right? Anything between the curly braces, which covers functions, covers ifs, covers for loops, covers while loops, anything that basically produces a block, right? That is all block scope. Let is block scoped. Const is block scoped. The difference between let and const, and most people got this, which was awesome, is that const means I can't mutate the value of whatever the variable is. So once I've set it, I set it and forget it. I can't touch it after that. That's the whole purpose of it. We use const if whatever we're storing into const, we don't have any intention of using it, because it actually helps us make our application more efficient. When you define something with const, it sets a specific memory allocation size for that, and not just some arbitrary amount, right? Which is awesome, because it means that this is only using the amount it needs to use, and we don't need to worry about it growing or shrinking and wasting more garbage collection time or anything like that. Right? Const, let, and var. Those are the three that you will see quite often. Global variables you will not see as often because they are something you want to try to avoid for the simple fact that once you set a global variable, they can be hard to maintain throughout your application, right? It's hard not to wind up with like naming collisions and things like that when you set a global variable. Any questions about those variable scopings? No? Okay. Yeah?
About global variables, like, how do they change values?
How do you change the global variable's value?
No, like how would it change values? Like, say you have a value into a function, does it change just in the function or like?
Not if you define a global. If you define a global where it doesn't have var, let, or const, and you put that inside the function, it is actually accessible entirely through the scope of the whole application. It doesn't matter where you are, you can access it. So say you set a variable inside a function called name, right? And gave it the value of Jill, right? Then somewhere else you set name to Sean. Name is now Sean. The name inside that function is now Sean. To avoid that, we use let or const or var, and then that stops it because it scopes it just within that range, right? And you want to do that because that's how you create more modular code. You want to be able to take functions you build and hopefully migrate them into other libraries or use them or reuse them in other places. You don't want to have to worry about naming collisions, right? And so if I create a library and I've scoped it all to Sean, I don't have to worry that if I have something called string replace conflicting with, say, jQuery's library, or Virginia's custom library, or anybody's custom library, right? That's the important point of using scoping variables. All right. The arithmetic section was done fairly well. The only one I noticed was this one. This is the question you guys had, right? You didn't have number 5 plus 5?
Yeah, it's 10.
It was this one, yeah. So this one, in order to make it work, was basically 10 plus, and then you parsed it using parse int. Parse int would basically extract the number, as long as it was at the beginning of the sentence, and return it and dump Sean. So Sean would be completely dumped out of the equation. It would add the 2, and step 3c would have been equal to 20. What I noticed a lot of people doing was they were basically taking 10, then they would just take this string out, and they would put it beside the 10, and then they would say plus parse int Sean. And I was like, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't understand this concept. But yeah, so that was one thing I noticed, but this is actually how this is used. And it's interesting because I said I don't generally use parse int all that much. And in the last week before I left my other job, I used it actually about 4 times, which was kind of weird because I hadn't used it prior to that. All right, that was another one. Strings, for the most part, were correct. Yeah, go ahead.
The number has to be at the beginning, right?
The number has to be at the beginning of the string, yeah. So if you had the 10 Sean, thing would blow up and return Nan.
Even if
Not
there's
a
a
number.
space, like it's going to blow up.
If the space is there, I don't know if it auto trims. It might auto trim. I don't think it does though. Oop. So if we had 10 plus parse int space 10, no, it auto trims. It just snugs it up, I guess. Yeah, doesn't treat the space character. Good question though. With strings, most of the strings were perfect. Most people remembered interpolation with the dirty backticks. I think the word dirty backtick is the reason why you remembered. And a lot of you remembered concatenation, which I was hoping, right? Because you use concatenation likely in Java. You definitely used it in PHP, right? And I'm sure you'll use it in C++ and other languages going forward. Concatenation is concatenation, right? But string interpolation was really cool. This one, though, caught a lot of people. A lot of people thought the way to solve this was just to change these quote characters to backticks, and then that was fine, and then they submitted it. But unfortunately, that doesn't do anything. The backticks only work if you wrap these in a parsing block, right? And even then, it still wouldn't have done anything because it literally would have been a symbol name, and it would have blown up because it's not a valid symbol name, right? So the way we correct this is by adding dot replace, the name, and then what you want to replace it with. So which lab did that show up, or which thing did that? Yeah.
I tried this, and it only replaced the name for once. When you have like 2 places.
It is very literal. It is possible. No, it should replace both.
No, it does once, so we have to use the regular expression
Yeah,
for
that's
that.
why
That's
I used
Really?
twice.
If you did, if you added the word dot replace with 2 values, I gave you the mark. So it doesn't matter either way. But that being said, though, that is interesting. Let's copy and paste this and see, because it should replace all the way through the word. All right, yeah. That's annoying.
You put like a /g after
Yeah,
your
/
name, and that will do all the
If you put it right after the name,
after you add other
so it's greedy.
things inside.
it's bad. That's literally.
Does that have to be inside the quotes?
I think so.
No. And yeah, you're right. It would make sense that it would be backslash.
Might be outside.
No, that's an unexpected tick. But I know what you mean, because I did see that. I saw a lot of people using regular expression in it.
Yeah.
That was totally cool, too. I think I made a comment on it, said, hey, thanks for thinking outside the box. But I didn't realize that. But if you did do dot replace, don't worry about it if you think you lost a mark for missing the second name value. I literally was just looking for dot replace. That's all I was looking for. As long as you had dot replace in there, I gave you the mark. 2 marks, actually, I think that was, or 3 marks maybe. I think it was a few. All right. Arrays were good, but like I said, many people didn't understand that arrays are 0 index. So when I asked for, and I was really liberal. Basically, if you put it in the second element or in the third element, I gave you the mark, right? Because thrind is not a word, right? So I can understand a bit of the confusion. But what a lot of people did was grab the third element from the first nested array. I got a lot of which would assume there's no 0 index, right? So if it's the first array, this would not be 1. What would it be? Be 0, right? Because it's the first index. So there was a lot of this combination. If you were one of those people that did that, I definitely recommend taking a look at indexing in arrays. Arrays are something you're going to use quite heavily in your programming career. So understanding that there's 0 index will save you a lot of heartache, right? The only language, I can't think of a single language that does not do 0 except for maybe Perl. SQL doesn't, does it?
And MySQL uses 1 not 0. That's 1 index.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never actually referenced an array element in SQL that way.
String indexes.
It's for like when you use string functions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe that's why, because I've never done any string functions that way, because I always let my programming language do the string function, right? And then once you guys learn about ORMs, you'll never touch SQL again, very likely. So, yeah. All right, one other oddity was how some students were adding elements to an array. So when we want to add an element to the beginning of an array, we use unshift. When we want to add it to the end, we use push. However, I had some students, which was really interesting. So the way this one worked is we had let step 8 array, I think is what it was called, equal, and this was new because imagine you guys hadn't seen this before, new array, right? Then when you were, some of you, not all of you, it was maybe, I'd say 20% out of 2 classes. We're doing it this way to add something on. We're going step 8 array. And I apologize for my penmanship. I type more than anything else. To add it to the beginning, they put a 0 and then equals whatever it was. Or if they were adding it to the end, they would just try to guess where the end was, or call an arbitrary number, index number, and then make it equal to whatever it is. Does anybody know what this would have returned? What would have likely happened if you tried to do it this way and then actually parse it?
This would have changed the value.
If there was a value existing, it would have changed it. If there was no value existing, you would have got a reference error, right? Because the reference didn't technically exist. So one thing I will recommend with these tests, like the final test specifically, just copy your code and throw it in the console. And just make sure it works, right? And then you're guaranteed. Then you know right off the bat if there's a problem. If you get a reference error, then it's likely because there's a problem with your variable name, right? So that is something to just note. Conditions were okay. Some were odd because it just seemed like most of the struggle here was with loose and strict comparisons, right? So when we want to compare strictly, we use 3 sets of equals. When we want to compare loosely, we use 2 sets of equals. So when we compare a string to a number, so the string of 25 to the number of 25, and we want to make that true, then we need 2 equal signs. If we want to make it false, though, we would need 3 equal signs, right? And that makes that false, and that's because 25 is not the same data type as this, even though they're the same value, right? So that's what strictly equals is doing for you. It's basically comparing your data type and your value. Now, a lot of you have read this and came up to me, and I thought it was kind of cool that you found this on your own. It is best practice to always use strict comparison. So a lot of people found that out. Many of your IDEs were like, hey, stop, you got to use strict comparison. So you're like, hey, this is broken, Sean. But that's the reason why. It's because it's better practice to use strict comparison. So, all right, cool. I was really surprised, as I wrote in here. Of course, you can see my notes. I was really surprised at how butchered the switch statement was for so many people. I would say more than half. More than half had issues with the switch statement. So I was like, okay, well, maybe you've never seen a switch statement before. So I went to Java and I looked it up because I don't code in Java. But I'm at the point in my life now, in my programming career, where the language doesn't matter to me, right? It's just syntax. I just got to go find out how you do it in that one. It's like learning English and French, right? If you want to say hello in French, you got to go learn the syntax to say hello in French, right? To me, that's the way programming works now for me. But so I looked up this switch statement because I thought maybe it's like really, really bizarre. It is exactly the same. There is no difference between the way the switch statement is written here than the way it is written in Java. So I was kind of surprised Did you guys never code a switch statement ever in your whole Java intro class?
Yeah.
Like once.
Once? Yeah.
Usually you
All right.
switch.
You will. You'll hit a point where you don't do much with. You'll hit a point in your programming career where when you do comparatives, you very rarely will even write an else statement because of the way you're doing comparatives, because you want to make your code very efficient, right? So you want to get the hell out of there as quick as possible. So you'll do like an if condition, do a check, and then bolt. As soon as it's true, you get out of there, right? So you wind up with multiple if conditions as opposed to if, else, right? Same thing kind of goes with switch statements. It's very rare you'll use a switch statement because of that reasoning, because you want to get out of there as soon as you possibly can. However, the switch true version is kind of handy because of what you can do for a comparison. Basically, the way I marked this one, if you had true in here, I was like, thumbs up, so impressed. If you had BBY in here, I was like, good enough, whatever. Is your syntax okay? Yeah, it was okay. Where I deducted marks was missing break tags, right? Why would I deduct a mark if you're missing the break statement?
Because it never.
Oh, it's very inefficient, because what's it doing? It's going to start here, and then where's it going to go? Right into the next one, do the evaluation, and execute it, I might add, and then keep doing that. So if BBY returned 30, this case was true, so it would have set it to 10. This case would have been true, so it would have overwritten it to 5. And then the default case would have just happened, and it would have been 0. So every single time it would have been 0, regardless. You need these break statements because it says, hey, when you're done this case, leave. Go do something else, right? So incidentally, switch statements versus if, else, if, they are more efficient because they exit. As soon as they're done, they exit, right? So they are a little bit more efficient. Yeah.
I feel like in a lot of these questions, I would have done a lot better if we're not an exam.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't even do that switch. I just did an if else. Like I didn't even read using a switch statement. I just like went straight to solving it.
Right. So that led to the other thing. If you used an if, else, if, I didn't give you the marks because it wasn't a switch statement, right? So that you might, some people lost marks there, not tons, but some did lose marks there because of that. Yes, there was a huge abundance of questions on the test. The way I do midterms or any type of test is I write the test, I give myself some time to forget about it, then I come back to it and I take it. And I say, how long did it take me to do it? And that includes looking things up on the internet and doing everything I need to do. 40 minutes. Cool. I feel at a junior level, you should be able to do that in my time times 3. That's where I usually put it. So that gives you 120 minutes, right? But most of you had about 140 minutes to be able to complete it. However, I found out quickly that that was not enough time. So, yeah, and a lot of you were like right under the gun. However, it kind of did 2 things. So I'm not calling anybody in here a cheater. So before you think I am, I'm not. But some people did cheat. And it was obvious because the mistakes were exactly the same fucking mistake. So with like right down to the same words. So I was like, yeah, okay. But you see, this test was kind of cool because there was just so much test. If you were waiting for your buddy to finish his answer so you could copy it, you were fucked. Yeah, you didn't complete. So it didn't matter. We did it all out anyways. Most people, I would say, did fine. Most people passed. Most people did okay. But if you look today, we're short, 10 people? And I bet you any bit of money, if I look at those 10 people's midterms, they're sitting in the low block. If you don't come, you'll have a lot more difficulty. All right. Where else do we? Functions were okay. There was obviously some difficulty with set timeout and set interval. A lot of people had difficulty with those. We'll revisit those because they're actually very handy functions to know. But I was very generous. If you wrote the word set timeout, I gave you marks. If you wrote the word clear interval or clear timeout, I gave you marks. So you got marks for those, even if they were just written on the page. Some of you, I wrote the comment, you obviously threw code at this screen in hopes that something would stick. So if you got that comment, I was talking about that. All right. I was very surprised at how many people left this one blank, though. Which one was this one that I'm talking about? Oh, fix the syntax. Yes, I was so surprised. I'm saying like maybe 70% of people left it blank. This is what the equation looked like. Fix the syntax, assign this to a variable. 2 easy marks right off the bat, but a lot of people left it blank. All right, and then this one, the callback questions. I was assuming the callback questions would create some difficulty, so I was kind of expecting it. So I tried to make it as basic as possible, but it definitely caught a few of you, so we will be exploring callbacks again. And then the events were a train wreck for the most part. The one thing I noticed, though, and this leads to today's topic, a lot of you used dot property ex dot, what was the other one? HTML. Some of you used all 3 and just gave me 3 event bindings. And then the other one was the event listener EX. You get it, right? These properties came from where? What's that?
We defined it we already defined it before.
Right, I defined it.
Yeah, you defined it.
I made them up. These don't exist in the API at all. Like, not at all. I made this shit up. Right? So I created a property called property X, and the only reason why I did that was so I could attach a child to it. But, like, I mean, like, 80% of you use these. Like, it was a huge number that used these properties, and I was like, my God, they think these are real things. Like, these things actually have legitimacy. So if I caught it and I was feeling kind of annoyed, I wrote a little blurb about how, you know, the sun's going to blot out and eat your code and stuff like that. Did anybody get my recursive one? The one I talked about where you guys wrote a recursion? So some of you wrote recursive functions accidentally. And basically recursive functions will just keep calling themselves till they run into Stack Overflow and basically blow out memory. And I wrote, this is going to run forever until the sun engulfs the earth and your computer becomes a looping piece of ash. That's what I wrote to some of you. But yeah, so anyways, these things were just stuff I made up. So today's lesson, I'm hoping, will help this make more sense on why I made these things up. Oh, yeah, and then we get into the last thing. So, assignment 1, because you guys have been asking, has been extended to November 4th. The reason why assignment 1 has been extended to November 4th, and by the way, all the assignments are open for multiple submissions. So if you've already submitted because you were like, fuck it, and just threw it up, then you're more than welcome to resubmit if you wanted to change it or modify it in any way. Today's class, I feel, will help assignment 1 be a little bit easier because we're going to talk about objects today and the DOM specifically. So I'm hoping that will help you. And going forward, I think that's going to be my first class anytime I teach this. It's the DOM because I feel like understanding that concept will make things a lot easier. Every class will be broken into 2 chunks. There'll be this first part of this class is not going to happen every time. This first part will be a quiz every week. They'll be passworded to promote attendance because I feel like attendance is what's going to help you succeed. That being said, there's so many quizzes that if you miss 2 of them, you're fine because they're only worth 10% for the whole semester. So 2 of them are a gimme. So if you miss a class, you don't need to like panic. Same with the labs. There'll be enough labs that if you miss one of the labs, you're okay because it's a gimme. Okay. The labs will be in 2 chunks. One of the chunks will be done during class. The second chunk will be done at the end of class, where I'll stick around until we get kicked out by Jessica, and then if we have to, we can move to the benches out there. Labs will be delivered every class and be expected to be completed by Sunday at midnight, and then they close out and disappear. Okay? And I will not reopen them. They're worth 1% in total. What else? They will only contain 10 complete steps, no ABC stuff, no, 1.A, 1.1, nothing like that, just 10 steps max. And they won't contain logic problems. So not anything for you to figure out, more like, hey, show me an example of this thing we just learned for this specific thing, right? So no you trying to figure out how to shuffle a deck. And I've extended the assignment submission date, okay? Please, some of you have taken advantage of Slack and will contact me, and we have long, engaging conversations on the weekend where I will help you work on your assignments. And I don't mind doing that because usually I'm building lesson plans and board out of my tree anyways. So if you want to contact me on Slack for help and support, I am all for helping you. I have no problem. That's why I did this, because one of the biggest things in the world that is most annoying for people is I have a question for my instructor and I cannot get this guy because he will not contact me back because he doesn't answer his email on the weekend. That's not me. I will answer my emails on the weekend. I will definitely talk back with you on Slack. So please use it. If you're struggling in any way or you need help with a concept, please contact me on Slack. I'm very good at getting back to you right away. Okay? Any questions about anything currently? Yes?
You have in the lab here that interested on Sunday at midnight is the first production. Is that still an old content? Or?
That must be an old thing that I wrote. I think that's when I was playing with the idea of if you submitted it in class, it was going to be a full mark, and then if you submitted it on Sunday, it was going to be 80% of the mark.
Right.
But then I abandoned that because there's two groups and they're all merged together inside Blackboard.
Yeah.
And I'd have to like try to separate you in order to do that. So I was like, fuck it. As long as you hand it in by Sunday, we're good. We're totally good. Yeah, I'm totally okay with that. All right.
Is the lab 2 date the same?
Lab 2 date was Sunday, I believe. Yeah, so I will give you to this Sunday with no penalty. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give you to this Sunday with no penalty. Going forward, labs will be able to be done in class. It'll take you max 15, 20 minutes to do this. Of course, they might take you 45 minutes. I don't know. But they should. There's not really anything that in depth. That being said, let's go to Blackboard real fast. For those of you that don't know, this is Blackboard. In case you've never been here before. I do question on whether some people have ever been there before. I also question the number of you that have actually set up your student email. Because I get questions that I've sent out in an announcement, and then I get the question like 3 days later, meaning you didn't get the email. So if you haven't set up your student email in semester, what semester are you guys in? 3? Yeah, if you haven't set up your email in semester 3, please set up your email, right? Woohoo! Got an order. What's that?
Just forward your student email to your main email. So
That's a great idea.
right there.
Yeah, set up an auto forwarder and just forward it automatically to your student email. Or God, set up an autoresponder and I'll give me the email you want me to send it to and I'll send it to that. I don't care. All right, so take starter DOM part 1 and bring it down. Now, I'm not sure how many of you actually noticed this, but during the test, I posted up a link to this, the gcsmckinnon.netlify.com. Netlify is pretty cool. Netlify is a free service, like 100% free, no credit cards, nothing like that, where you can set up a static website. So you don't get PHP, no Ruby, no Java, nothing like that. It's only for static sites, but it will run JavaScript and everything like that. It's entirely free, and it's fantastic, and I think I'm going to actually use it because I think it's cool. But anyways, I loaded up all of our examples that we've been doing over the last few weeks. I loaded them up into the gcsmckinnon.netlify. I've sorted them into actual things we've learned to the example ones like the number guessing game, guess that phrase, tic-tac-toe, Simon Says, and go fish. Yeah, Allie?
Can I ask that you put the link to that in your resources?
The Netlify link? Yeah, I can totally do that. That actually makes a lot of sense. Let me put that in the resources folder. Anyways, it's kind of handy because when you're following along, you want to see, how do we actually do this thing? All examples live. Then you can actually go to the Netlify example and just kind of pull it up. And basically the idea is, I'll move that up too, because it's kind of really low down there. There we go. Make sure the link works like a charm. All right, so like for today, for example, we're going to be doing the DOM part 1 and the DOM part 2. I might better change this page and sort it out and even throw in the GitHub link into each one of these so you know where they are in the GitHub repository as well. But when you click on it, then it loads up the page. This is the completed version of the page, everything that basically the example we're going to do today, entirely complete and ready to go. So you can kind of take a look at it. So if you do miss a class, you should be able to go here and kind of be able to tell what we've done. Also, as part of the new application flow, or the new class flow, I'm going to be creating lesson plans kind of like this, where it's more like a textbook idea. So you can actually read different things, because I go off the cuff. I don't generally read what I've got on my screen. So sometimes this information can be invaluable to you for studying, right? Because this is me not being a ADHD and actually focusing and writing properly, completing sentences, using words. So it's actually a pretty good thing. So hopefully that helps a little. Okay, so we're pulling down, hopefully we've pulled down the DOM starter 1. I'll go back to where that was. That's under week 8, introducing objects and the DOM. And we're going to pull down the starter DOM part 1. Okay. So over here. And if you open it up, you can open up the main.js file, because that's what we're going to be working in. This is a direct copy of what you see over here. The index HTML page is this page. The CSS is the CSS that's currently styling that page. And the main.js file is the JavaScript that is currently doing things on this page. Okay? So we're going to open the main.js file. So we haven't really talked in depth about the DOM. We've kind of glazed over it every single class, right? But the DOM is probably one of the most important parts when you're working with client-side JavaScript. Because the DOM, does anybody know what the DOM is? What it's a representation of? Yep.
In the HTML document.
Exactly. It's a reflection of your HTML document. It's not limited to HTML. It will actually work with any XML-based language. Doesn't matter what XML-based language you're working with. The DOM will be constructed when you load up that XML document inside your browser. The DOM is, there's two different pieces to the DOM. There's the DOM itself, which is this document object model, which is where the browser actually takes your HTML page, goes through tag by tag, creates an object out of each tag, and turns it into this object with properties and methods, right? You guys have all done object-oriented programming. You coded in Java, so you definitely have. So you've built classes, right? You know what a class is. A class is like a blueprint for an object, right? Objects always have properties and methods. Your teacher may not have called them that, though. They may have called them attributes and functions. They may have called them data members and data functions. They could have called them fields. Anybody have somebody tell them that they're called fields? That's a weird one. But yeah, but I call them properties and methods, right? When I'm talking about functions, I generally talk about main level functions, right? I'm talking about your main file. That's usually when I refer to functions. When I'm talking about methods and properties, I'm always talking about an object. Always. Anytime I say method or property, I'm talking about an object. Okay? Properties, for those of you that are confused about what they are, they're just a variable. At the end of the day, they're a variable that's been nicely namespaced, right? It's scoped inside your class usually, right? You create these properties. They're representations of describing factors of your particular object. In the summertime, I teach C++, and I was surprised that, that's the 4th semester, or is that the 6th semester? That might even be the 6th semester for some people, because they're in the programming analyst course. And a lot of people didn't know really what properties and methods were, or how that worked with an object, or really what an object was supposed to be. So we talked a lot about it, and we came up with the idea that an object can be best described by a noun, right? An object basically represents a person, place, or thing. That's really what an object is, right? An object is a student. An object is a teacher. An object is a checking account, right? Those are all objects. Those are all nouns, right? Properties are describing things. They're adjectives. They're basically things that describe your object, right? So in a checking account, you will have an account number, right? That describes what your account is connected to. You'll have a balance, right? You'll have things that don't do anything, they basically just are descriptors. Okay? So members then become more of the functionality of what the object can do. Right? What is this thing capable of doing? Your members are your verbs, essentially. So let's break this down again. An object is a noun, your properties are your adjectives, and your methods are essentially your verbs. Right? So if you have a person, they have an eye color, a hair color, and they have a height and a weight, right? Those are what? Those would be properties or methods.
Properties.
Exactly. They can talk, they can walk, they can run, right? They can shout. What are those?
Methods.
Those are methods. Exactly. And it's no different than when we work inside JavaScript. There is a few little differences. They're not little, actually. They're catastrophically big. JavaScript is not a class-based language. Okay? They don't work with classes at all. We work with something called prototypes instead. And we're going to talk more in depth next week about prototypes, but suffice it to say that the objects we're working with did not come from a class blueprint. They're created instantly. They immediately exist. Yes?
When you were referring to things as classes in like the assignment book, were you trying to say like an object?
Style class.
Style class.
Yeah. If I say class and we're talking about JavaScript, I'm generally usually talking about style class, so CSS, right? I'm saying use this CSS selector. That is a tricky thing, isn't it? Because the word class shows up so many times, and it's such a necessary keyword in object-oriented programming. But when you're using JavaScript, unless you're using ECMA 6, for those of you that use ECMA 6 and know about the new class syntax that exists, that's not generally what I'm referring to. And I don't see within the scope of our current class we're ever going to talk about those. Okay? And at the end of the day, they don't make any difference anyways because they're still prototypes. They're just wrapped with this new layer to create like a kind of, to help new programmers who don't understand prototypal inheritance and prototype objects work with classes, essentially is what they are. But just ignore the word class. If you heard the word class in JavaScript, I am likely referring to a CSS class. That's what I mean. Okay? So the DOM, this big wonderful thing. Introducing the DOM, the document object model, right? Object, that key word in there. Object. Object contains methods, contains properties. Don't forget that. We're always working with methods and properties. Everything in JavaScript, that's bullshit. Almost everything in JavaScript is an object. Okay? Some things are not objects when you first create them that then become objects the second you try to do something to them. So that kind of blows your brain a little bit. But suffice it to say that 99.9% of the stuff you're going to work with in JavaScript is an object. Again, let's roll back to the first statement. Objects are things that contain properties and methods, right? So whenever I'm calling those are properties on an object. That's what they are. And just like properties that you have with your classes, you can make them up. I made those up. Those don't actually exist in the browser API or the DOM API. I made them up. I just created them to help me with child selector. That's all I did. So let's, maybe we should stop going off the cuff. The DOM is simply an object. It's no different than the objects you create in object-oriented programming. The DOM represents our entire HTML page. It provides, like objects do, properties and methods that basically allow us to do multiple different things, but the priority ones are the CRUD operations, right? Does everybody know what CRUD is? Create, read, update, delete, right? They provide us all the CRUD operations, things to basically manipulate our DOM. The DOM is not exclusive to JavaScript. That's very important to understand. There's a thing called the DOM specification. It basically says, hey, JavaScript, you want to use the DOM? You have to follow this specification. You must have methods called this. You must have objects called this. You must have properties called this in order to use it. That is a requirement in order for you to be allowed to be a part of our browser. Okay, cool. We can do that. But it's not exclusive to JavaScript. There's actually a lot of languages that work with the DOM object. PHP works with the DOM object using the DOM. I always forget the name of this stupid thing, even though I used it so much. DOM document. That's what it's called, DOM document. PHP has this DOM document, and it works exactly the same way. It creates methods and nodes for accessing different elements inside your DOM. In Ruby, you have the same thing, and they have this wonderful library called Nokoguri. I love Nokoguri. Thing is fantastic, but it allows you to interact with an HTML page and work with it just like a DOM, right? Just the same as you would with JavaScript. The DOM is a specification. The resulting piece is this object that you can now work with and play with and do whatever you need to do. And it contains multiple different pieces. It contains things like the HTML elements, node lists, and collections. And we're going to actually take a look at these things. Have I jumped ahead accidentally? Yeah, the HTML element, we've done this already. You guys have actually worked with HTML elements since week 1, pretty much. Every time we do a document.query selector and select a tag, it returns an HTML element. And it's not an accident that I wrote this all as one word, right? It is not an accident that it's written HTML E with no spaces, element. I'm running out of space. There's no accident here. This is intentional. And the reason is because if we think of class-based languages, right? If we're thinking of a class-based language, that's a class name. Okay? That's a blueprint. It's a blueprint that we're going to work with, and it contains different pieces about our object that we need to know. Every tag on your page, the body tag, the paragraph tag, the span element that you have on there, the anchor, the break tag, an HR, doesn't matter what the tags are on your page, they all become this. They all become an HTML element. Node lists are a bit different. Node lists are a collection of these. So when we call query selector all, so you guys did this in your assignment 1, you pulled back all the cards, right? When you pulled back all the cards, you wound up with this thing called a node list. A node list, you can think of it like an array, because it basically is an array. It's an array of every single element that matches your selector, and it gets pulled back as a big collection. But unlike an array, just a regular array, it also has properties and methods and things like that on it as well, that you can actually manipulate and work with this node list. It also contains things that you might not be expecting. Sometimes when you pull back these lists, they could be an HTML collection. And HTML collections and HTML node lists don't work the same way, which is kind of interesting. Most things in JavaScript are objects. Objects have properties and methods. This is a very important concept you need to understand. We keep repeating this whole subject, right? Objects. Objects are very, very important. In standard object-oriented programming, classes are created as a blueprint, right? You guys knew that. Does a class, when you create a class, do you automatically have an object? No. It's just a blueprint. It's just a thing to basically state, hey, this is how this thing is supposed to work. Should have these things inside of it, right? Should have a constructor, should have this property, and this property should have a value, stuff like that. That's all it is. It's just a blueprint. It's basically a way of you telling another person that, hey, if you want to use my class, my badass class, you better make sure you have these things in place, right? Don't get that confused with interfaces. Interfaces are a little different. So the classes are created as blueprints of attributes and functionality, or properties and methods, right? Let's use the words we want to use. The properties and methods, actually I haven't wrote it. The attributes and functionality are better known as properties and methods. If we want a subset of those methods and properties, we need to create a new class that inherits from another class, right? Which you've seen before. You have a parent class. You might have a parent class called accounts. And then you'll have a child class called checking account and a child class called savings account, but they're all inheriting from accounts, right? And we do that so we can kind of keep everything nicely organized. That's object-oriented programming. You guys have very much definitely done that in Java. You guys have inherited classes in Java, right? Okay. Because you're looking at me very confused. That's why I was asking. Yeah.
No, when you say accounts, I thought you were some cows.
No, not cows. Yes, no. We don't have a checking cow and a saving cow. We definitely have accounts. I will try to speak English better. All right. If we want, so we can inherit, right? And most languages support this. Java supports this, right? Java supports classes. Java supports inheritance, class inheritance. It's also in PHP. Did you guys do any object-oriented programming in PHP? Probably not really, right?
Data objects.
Data objects?
Yeah.
So you actually created a class and stuff?
Or you just use pre-K.
Either way, you guys know that objects exist in PHP. They loosely exist in PHP. PHP is kind of a gross language. Did you know it didn't actually have object-oriented programming available to it until PHP 5.3?
I would 100% believe that.
Had nothing.
Yeah.
There was no object-oriented programming until 5.3, and then they were like, maybe we should catch up to the rest of the fucking world. C++, yeah, that's object-oriented. That's its selling feature, right? It was like, hey, C, get some classes. Oh, we'll call that C++. And we'll give it classes, and we'll give it functions and properties and methods, and we'll totally rock the world. And then everybody ignored it, unless you're a video game developer, and you're like, yeah, I want to get everything out of my processor that I can possibly get. Now we have also Ruby, right? Ruby works on classes. Ruby gets even worse. They have like another level called modules. So you can have modules, and then classes, and then your functions. And a class can exist in a class, and it just breaks your brain, right? Ruby, stellar shit. And then other languages, C#, Swift. There's so many, right? Object-oriented programming is such an important concept to understand. JavaScript kind of changes this whole process, though, because JavaScript doesn't use classes. Ready to have your brain blown? It uses object prototypes exclusively, which means when you create your object, when you create your class, we'll say, right, your prototype object, it is immediately usable. It exists in the world instantly. Okay? So remember, classes don't exist instantly until you instantiate them, right? That's the way classes work. But in JavaScript, that is not the case. In JavaScript, the second you create that little object guy, he's there. He's ready to be used. He's excited. He's pumped. He wants to be a part of your application. Okay? Ready to go. So let's create an object. And then we'll take a break right after that because it's getting late. All right. Where are we going to create this little fella? Create a new object called a person. Is this the main for this? Maybe I've opened the wrong main file. No, that's the main for it. Where did I do this then? Boo. It's like the first step, and I don't remember where I did this. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong subject entirely. Yeah, let's work on DOM part 1. That makes a lot more sense. Thank you, Virginia. I totally missed that. Right. All right, so we'll do step 1. We're going to select an element of the DOM with CSS. So like I said, we've been working with DOMs. We've done this query selector kind of stuff like a bajillion times. So let's do the first part. The first part I wanted to show actually is the comparison. We're going to actually open up styles.css. We're going to type, don't get excited, Vlad, we're only doing 4 styles. 4 styles, that's it. But basically what I'm going to say is that when we use the selectors, we actually pass them the CSS style tags in order, just like we would with the CSS selector, we pass it the style tag in order to select the element on the DOM. And that is because the DOM provides to us a way for us to select those elements from the DOM object by using those CSS selectors. So you have likely selected elements in the past using CSS. You've had to use a combination of tags, IDs, class names, and attributes in order to walk the HTML to go find the thing. If you've had Scott, you didn't use a lot of classes and you didn't use a lot of IDs because he's very much the CSS ninja who likes to walk the DOM to find the exact element that he wants you to select. So, but we're not going to do that. The first thing we will do, though, is we're going to select and style an element using the tag selector. We're going to select and style this element using the tag selector. How can I find this element? I can right-click, and we can choose Inspect. Yep. I'm going to drop this thing to the bottom here.
Elements.
I'm going to go to Elements, yeah. Styles here. I'm going to try to grab this and expand it up a bit. There we go. And then I'm going to grab this and shove it back down again. All right, I want this element here, so I'm going to click Inspect. And this element is a span. So it says, using the span tag name, styled an element. Okay, so we'll do that. So in CSS, all I do is type in span, right? And give it a curly brace. And you can do whatever you want. Background color, the actual color, whatever you choose. I'm going to do color. And I'm going to make it pink. And now all my spans went pink, right? Because CSS selectors, that is a very global selector. That basically says every span on the whole page, color it pink. The second one says select and style the second element using the class selector. So I can go find the class selector. The class selector in this scenario is called class style. So I'm going to write dot class style because that's how I select classes in CSS, right? And maybe I'll make this color blue. Now in CSS, we can also select an element on the page by using the ID, right? That's a very important concept. So for the ID, we're going to grab the third element using the ID. Let's go find out what that is. And it's ID style. So it's hashtag ID style, braces. And I'm just going to make it red. There we go. And then the last one, I want to grab this one by its span data attribute. And if you look at it and you open it up, you can see that it has this data-css attribute style, right? I'm not sure if you knew this, but in CSS, you can actually select elements by an attribute. You simply give it the square brackets. You give it the attribute's name. And that's all you need if you want to select every single DOM element or HTML element on the page that has the attribute data-css. Okay? So if you wanted to select every single anchor tag that has a href, you could literally just do square brackets href, and it would select every single anchor tag that has a href, right? Or every element that has a source attribute. You could do the same thing and just add the word source in there. Okay? If you want to specify based on a value, you simply go equals with a set of quotes. I'm going to say attribute style, because that's the name of the attribute in here. Or sorry, it's the value of the attribute. And I'm going to make it orange. Orange. Now you might be like, John, this is not a CSS class. Why are we learning about CSS classes? And the whole reason is because these same four things that we're using to select the HTML element on the page so that we can style it, are the same four things we can use to actually select HTML elements on the page so that we can use them in JavaScript, right? Every time we do document.querySelector, we pass it one of these four types of selectors, right? In order for us to grab whatever it is on the page that we want to grab. Now, I just don't want to lose our momentum here. So we'll do the next step and then we'll take a break. Selecting elements of the DOM with JavaScript. When the DOM is created, it creates an object for us to work with called the document, right? You guys have used document quite often. That document, believe it or not, that document is this right here. And incidentally, all HTML elements inherit from element. Okay, so document is element. And believe it or not, that's where we get the dot query selector from. That comes from this guy here. It's a method that's a part of element. And that's what gives it back to us. So as long as something is inheriting from that, we get query selector. Immediately, we get that method. And query selector allows us to select random tags on the screen. Now, in the next piece here, I'm showing you how you can select different things using get elements by tag name, get elements by ID, get elements by class name. And I was going to actually, yeah, we'll do it. Give me 1 second here. Open up your main.js file. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually use getElementsByTagName to grab the h1 that's on the page. And just like in CSS, we do it the same way. We go document.getElements, and it's elements, and that's going to become important in a few minutes, by tag name. Does anybody want to guess what the parameter is, the argument is? The h1. That's exactly it. It's the tag name. Notice this is no different than if we were to do it in CSS. We do it exactly the same way. We said span in CSS. This we're saying h1. We're just giving it the CSS that we want to select by. We can go ahead and uncomment out this piece here. Save it. It is by tag name. Is it not? Get elements by tag name. Maybe I spelled something wrong. No, I did not. It's not get element. It is definitely get elements.
Could we not specify? Could we not name?
Oh, yeah, that would help. Let's create variables and store things in them. That would be very helpful. There we go. Nice catch, man. Thanks. It's Nathan, right? Nathaniel. All right. Now notice we didn't get an HTML element back. What did we get back?
Collection.
We got a collection. A collection is very much like a node list. It is an array of elements. Does anybody want to take a guess at why we got a collection back? And not just one element back? Yeah, it's definitely in the name, isn't it? Get elements by tag name. And the reason is because this is an older JavaScript method that was used for grabbing different tags on the page. And the one downfall to it is it would return all of the elements it found, right? Because you don't have one paragraph tag, you have many paragraph tags. You don't have one span, you have many. But you should, if you're abiding by Google's SEO practices, only have one H1 on that page. But it doesn't care. You're going to get a collection every time. It's not going to change it up based on what you're actually choosing. It's going to always return a collection. And it's in the name. Get elements, plural, by tag name. Let's do the next one. Select and store this element into a variable using the method. All right, so we'll do const. I don't know. We'll do by ID equals. Yep.
Why are we just not doing like console.log in the name of the variable? Why are we doing like .constructor.name?
.constructor.name. Oh, the .constructor.name. So the constructor is the name of your object, like your object blueprint, right? So kind of think of that as like the class name, right? It's the prototype name. And then the dot, so that actually just returns back the constructor piece, the function. In order to get the name of it, I do .name. And the only reason I'm doing that is to show you what type of constructor this object is. So this one is an HTML collection. The next one we select, when we select it, document.get element, not elements this time, element by ID. And I don't remember the actual ID of it, so I'm going to have to look it up. Or I could just look at my notes. That would be probably much easier. Oh, yeah, good thing I looked it up. It's select example-1. What a convoluted way to do that. And then I'm going to uncomment this. And this returns as an HTML span element. It didn't return as a collection this time. Just curious, does anybody want to guess why it didn't return a collection?
You didn't add an S.
Let's see if Steve's right. We'll add an S. Oh, we get an error. It doesn't actually exist as a method.
IDs are unique.
That's exactly it. You nailed it right on the head. IDs are unique. You should only ever have one on the page. There shouldn't be more than one, right? Because they're unique, there's no reason for you to get a collection back. You should only ever get one element back. Incidentally, HTML span element is a child of HTML element. Okay? We'll talk about interfaces next week. All right, step 3. Select and store these elements into a variable using the method. This time we're going to grab by class names this time. So we're going to do const by class name equals document.get. Anybody want to guess? Is it with an S or no S? S. And why would it be with an S? Hells yeah. We got multiple classes, right? You can have multiple classes on the page. Therefore, you can definitely select more than one. And that is select EX-2. And then we will uncomment this out. And again, we get a collection. Now we're going to take a break here in 1 second. All I'm going to say is we don't use these anymore. Many of you use them on your test, though. I want to say a large number of you use them on your test to select elements. We don't use these anymore because they're not unpredictable. They're just annoying, right? When I select by tag name, I want the same thing back. When I select by class, I want the same type of thing back. And when I select by ID, I want the same thing back. I don't want 3 different things. I want the same type of thing to work with. So what do we use now instead of these?
Query selector.
Yep, query selector. And what's the one if I want to get back a collection?
Query selector all.
Query selector all. And no matter what, even if I run query selector all and pass it an ID, I still get back a collection. But I'm guaranteed that. I'm guaranteed that every time, which means that's predictable. And as a programmer, that's what we always want. We want things to be predictable so that we can run the same method on it. So I can run a for each loop on that and don't have to worry about it blowing up because this one particular time it drew back an HTML element instead of a collection, right? All right, so why don't we take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back. And I think what we're likely going to do is finish off part 1, do the first part of the lab, and then we'll push into next week for the next part of the lab in part 2. Okay? I kind of thought this might take 2 classes. I wasn't totally sure. All right. All right, let's resume. Okay, we'll see if we might be able to get to part 2, because part 2 is actually quite small. But I definitely want to do the lab part. So we're going to bulldoze through this, then we're going to do the first chunk of the lab, and then we'll see where we're at after that. Cool?
Cool.
You on the phone? Okay. All right. Because I'm going to talk anyways. Yeah, not to be rude. But all right, so like I said before, when we actually use the tags, IDs, and get elements those way, those are old legacy selectors. We don't use those anymore. So please, going forward, do not use them. In case you are concerned that .query selector might blow up, it works as far back as IE8. And if you're using IE8, get it. Because there's no reason for you to be using IE8. And there's no reason for you to support it. And if you have a client that wants you to support IE8, you should be charging that guy through the nose. Because that is a terrible browser to try to support. Anyway, so we have .query selector, and we have .query selector all. And you as programmers always want to make sure that you have consistency, especially when you have things coming back to you. You always want the same thing coming back. Makes your life a lot easier, makes things better. Makes dynamic metaprogramming a lot easier as well when all you're doing is feeding it CSS selectors. You can get really kind of crazy with that, right? You could create an array, for example, of just selectors and then run through your array on a for each loop, grabbing different elements off the page just using those selector titles, and every single one you can use .query selector all or .query selector for it, right? You don't have to worry about using the correct selection tag. All right. We have done this so many times, which is awesome. Remember, all HTML tags are elements, and this thing says this like 80 times. All HTML tags are elements. Okay, I cannot express that enough. All HTML tags are elements, not even just related to the DOM. That's what they are. When somebody says, hey, did you add the element to the page? That's what they're meaning. They mean, did you add an HTML element to the page? Not even JavaScript related, not even PHP related, literally just HTML in general. People refer to those HTML tag sets as elements. That's what they're talking about. Okay? However, when we attempt to access them, they can be returned in two different ways. We can either get back the HTML element, or we can get back an HTML collection or a node list. HTML collections and node lists are very similar. So what's the difference? An HTML element represents an HTML element, right? And it represents the actual tag on the page. This object contains, as objects do, many methods and properties that allow us to work with specific HTML. HTML elements are returned when we select a unique element, okay? Which is not entirely true, because when we use .query selector, we always get back an HTML element. Always. Never fail. Unless it doesn't exist. Then you'll get back null or whatever, or undefined. But if it exists, you will always get back one HTML element. The first one it finds. The absolute first one on the page it finds is the one it will return. Okay? You can rely on that. You can take that to the bank. Query selector all will always, regardless if it finds 1 or if it finds 90, it will always return back a node list, an HTML collection. It will never return back anything other than that. It will always get back this collection. Never fail. Okay? Even if you select an ID with it. If you select an ID with it, even though, like you said, IDs are unique, there should only ever be one on the page. However, if you select it using query selector all, you will get back a collection. Okay? So, let's see here. What makes an element unique can vary with being as specific as an ID, right? IDs make things unique, like we said before. As broad as the document order, right? So when you get back a collection, you can actually treat it just like an array, and you can actually reference the indexes, right? So if you have 5 paragraphs and you want the first paragraph, remember arrays are 0 indexed, you can, on the HTML collection, you can put in square brackets and 0 and pull back that first paragraph, right? And it'll come back as an HTML element. An HTML collection is an array of HTML elements in order of placement in the document, okay? So your first paragraph will be in index 0. Your second paragraph will be index 1, so on and so forth. It's in the order they are in the document, not nesting order or anything like that. Just as it runs through the document, it's shoving them into that collection. So we have an example on this page. Const ps or ps equals document.getElements by tag name p. Let first p equal ps0. That's because it's an array. Get elements by tag name always returns back the array. All right, let's jump ahead a little bit because that's legacy stuff, and I want to get into new stuff. Query selector all and query selector. Remember, an HTML element represents an HTML element, right? We said this before. An HTML element is an object created by DOM API that contains many methods and properties, including the query selector and the query selector all, which helps us or allows us to select other HTML elements within the scope of that HTML element we call from. The query selector takes one argument, and that is a CSS selector string. Okay, it's always a selector string. Same ones you use in CSS. Who's done CSS in this class? That's what I hoped. So you know how to write the selector. You know how to select a DOM element using those same selectors. Whether you select by tag, class ID, or attribute, you will always get back only the first instance the selector finds when you use query selector all. That is very important to understand, right? Select and store the H2. So we're going to move to step 4. Select and store the H2 tag on the page using document query selector. So let's do that. Const H2, or the H2, sorry, equals document.querySelector H2, not H1. Oop, I had multiple selectors on for some reason. Does anybody know why I'm using const and not let or var? What's that?
You know you're not going to change them after.
I'm never going to change them, yeah. Even if I access a property of this and change the value of the property, it's irrelevant. this actually returns back. Objects are always returned back by reference, right? Did you guys learn about value and by reference? So by value means you get the value back of this particular thing. It literally clones it and gives you a copy of it, and you now store that. Whenever you're passing variables around, they're always passed by value, in JavaScript at least. Not necessarily every language, but in JavaScript they are. Which means if I have x equal to 5 and I make y equal to x, and then I change the value of x, y is still 5. Because it cloned it, copied it, pasted it in place. That is not true when it comes to objects. Objects are always passed by reference. And when you take C++, this gets a little bit easier to understand. Reference is literally saying, hey, here's my memory address. This is where my stuff is located. I put my stuff here. You can go access my stuff from there. So when you actually say x is equal to object and y is equal to x, all you're saying is, hey, x, that's your memory address, and you're storing that in place. So if you manipulate y, you are manipulating that memory location. You're manipulating the things inside there, which means x will be just as affected as y is. That's the important concept of reference. It's also the thing that tends to catch people up, right? Because they forget that things are done by reference, and they're like, wait a minute, I changed y. Why is x changing? That's because of referencing, okay? That's why I use const. The reason why I use const is because document.query selector h2 is going to return back a what? An HTML element or an HTML collection? An element, exactly. And it's going to return back that element to me, and that element is what kind of programming thing? Is it a variable? It's a prototype, yep, definitely. It is a prototype, so it is an object, right? It's an object, and objects are passed by reference or value.
Reference.
Reference. And reference is referring to what? The memory address, exactly. So because of that, it's never going to change, ever, because it's a reference to a memory address, and there's no way you're changing that address at any point. So that's what I'm going to store in there, just the H2, because it's never going to change. So on question blah, blah, blah on the midterm, where I said, hey, you want to earn a quick 21 points, go do this, right? If you said const, I was very proud of you, because you got that concept or you lucked out. I'm saying you got concept. Most of you didn't do that. Most of you did let, which is totally cool as well. But const is definitely the preferred, more efficient way to do this. All right. God, it doesn't take me much to get on a tangent, eh? Step 5. Select and store this element using the ID using document.query selector. Okay, so it's const QSID is the name of the ID equals document.query selector hashtag QSID. And that returns back the span element, right? They're all returning back span elements. Span elements, yes, I know they say span element, but they are all this thing. They are all HTML elements. Every one of them. We could do step 6, and we could do step 7, but at the end of the day, I think you get the idea, right? When I was asking for, suggestions on how to make this a little easier for people to grasp, one person suggested, just explain the abstract idea. If you explain the abstract idea, we'll get it. And that is true. If you're an abstract thinker, then you will definitely get that idea. That idea basically is, this is the only thing that makes the difference of what we bring back, right? That is the only thing that defines what HTML element on the page we're bringing back, and that is always a what? It's always a CSS selector. It's never not, right? Always a CSS selector. And CSS selectors can be 4 different things. They can be a tag name, like span, p, div, body, head, whatever. They can be a ID, hashtag this ID, hashtag that ID, hashtag Kardashian, hashtag whatever, right? They can be a class name, right? Dot my class, dot red, dot card, dot flipped, right? And they can be an attribute. Those are your 4 selector options that you have. Okay? Cool, let's move down. Let's go to selector all on step 7. Select and store all the article tags on the page using the document query selector all. Okay, so that's going to look like const. And if I'm selecting multiple things, I don't know, maybe it's the English in me that wants to choose articles because that makes sense, right? I'm putting multiple in there, so I'm going to use the plural for it. Plus, then when you run a for loop, it makes it so much more cleaner. When you're saying let article of articles, just makes sense. When you guys do MVC, you'll do that a lot. Document.query selector all. What am I going to put in here to grab all the articles? Article. Fantastic. Article, the tag name, right? What's that going to return back? A node list. Fantastic. A node list. A node list is essentially an HTML collection. They are slightly different. Very slightly different. The node list, I would say, is more verbose. The node list, if you look at it, it's going to actually return back an array of nodes, right? Based on our selector. Well, our selector was article, so our node list is just article. And we only have one because there was only one article on the page. But no matter what, I got a collection. I got a node list, right? Which is awesome because I can predict that. In my magical array of different selectors, I'm running my for each, and I'm going query selector all this thing, and then I'm looping through it. Right? I should be able to give it anything I want and be able to loop every single time, and it shouldn't break because me as a programmer can know predictably what I'm going to get back. I'm always going to get a node list if I use query selector all. I'm always going to get an HTML element if I use query selector. Okay? Let's do one more. Step 8, select and store all the paragraph tags on the page. All right, so const ps equals document.query selector all. How do I select all the paragraph tags? P, that's right. And that should return back my node list. And what's kind of nice is Chrome even actually shows you like a preview of each one of these. Notice some of these have a class called content in them, some of them don't. But it shows you everything. It's every single paragraph in our document. If you don't believe me, you can go count them. And then count the ones in the node list. There should be 20 in total.
Why does view say .content?
So that's because in our HTML, we actually have, on some of the paragraphs, we have a class called content. So what it's doing is it's actually returning back the full selector for it. So it returns back p.content. If we had 6 classes on that, it would return back all the other classes. If we have an ID on it, it would return back p hashtag whatever the ID was. Don't rely on that though, because that's definitely a browser thing. It might not do that in Safari. It might not do that in Opera or whatever other browser you're using. It just happens to do that in Chrome's console. Yeah. All right, we can do the same thing with classes as well. We could do const qs classes, right? I like using plural when I'm selecting multiple HTML elements. Document.query selector all. And the class I'm looking for is QS class. Incidentally, I always do this. I always do the plural when I'm selecting a multitude of something, or if I'm storing an array list, I always use the plural in my variable naming. So if this was all, if the class was person, right, I'm grabbing back all the elements that have the class person on it, I would call my variable people, for example. That is very likely because of the amount of MVC stuff I do. All right, so that should return back 4 nodes, right? 4 HTML elements, the span, all 4 spans, right? And notice all 4 spans have .qs class on it because all 4 spans have that class. Was I guaranteed to get only spans back? No, I could have got anything back that had the class QS class, right? We're almost done. Yeah.
So that would only work if it had dot query selector all, like for example.
Right. Only if it had query selector all
What is
will
it?
you get a node list back.
So if I tried the same thing with that all, would it go up? Or?
No, you'll still get, but you'll only get one back. You'll
I
get,
mean, for me, I get a constructor like.
you will get this back. Oh, because you're using QS class within the dot. You have to treat it just like a CSS selector, so you need the dot. Yeah. That's an important thing to understand. It is a CSS string. So just like in CSS, you have to do .qs class. The same thing with query selector or query selector all. You have to do .qs class. All right, we're almost there. Using the document.querySelector method, select the first OL on the page. This next thing we're going to take a look at is called DOM walking. Right? A lot of people are going to say that to you. Well, did you walk the DOM? And you're like, I don't have a dog named Dom, dude. Walking the DOM basically means crawling through the HTML nesting to go do and select this one thing, right? You guys did DOM walking when you did CSS. You crawled through. If you guys had Jessica.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jessica strikes me as the type of person that would very much emulate Scott. So she probably frowned on classes and IDs and would prefer you to walk the DOM.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So based on that, the thing is that's funny about that, if you are a programmer and you're programming interfaces, you won't want to do that. The reason why you won't want to do that is because, so say I program an interface and all I've done is DOM walking in my CSS, and then I hand my interface off to Nathaniel and say, Nathaniel, go add this particular thing, and Nathaniel's like, dude, this HTML is garbage. And he starts moving stuff around. What has he done? He's broken my CSS, hasn't he? My CSS is entirely broken. So to avoid that, when you work in the industry and you're doing a lot of that, you generally don't walk the DOM. You'll add classes and IDs because it's much easier to just pinpoint what it is you want to change. Not that that's necessarily better. I don't know if there's an efficiency in walking the DOM. I have no idea. Anyways, the point is DOM walking isn't limited to CSS, right? It's not you crawling through HTML. So for example, if I have an LI inside an OL, in CSS I can go OL first child to grab the first list, LI, right? And that now grabs the LI tags inside that unordered list, or ordered list, sorry. In JavaScript I can do the same thing. But what's kind of cool, first let's, before I move on, let's first grab the OL tag. So we'll do document.querySelector, OL, right? Save that. That's going to return back an HTML element, right? Called the OL element. OL list element. The good old list element. That is an HTML element, right? Now, what's very, very cool, when we go and grab these things, document is what type of object? Remember I told you guys at the beginning? It's an HTML element, right? It's literally our whole HTML page, technically, right? Document is an HTML element. That's why it has this method, query selector all on it. We have it available to us. Did you know when you add the CSS attribute or whatever, the CSS string that you want to go look for, it's looking for it in the scope of the object you called it on. So the object we called it on was document, right? That's the HTML element we're calling it on. The method we're calling is query selector all, and we are looking for all the OL tags within the scope of document. Okay? Now, some of you are probably thinking, so if I wanted to select all the LI tags of only that OL, then in theory, I should be able to do something like this. And that will only return back the LIs in the scope of this OL. which means I won't get every single LI on the page, which there's like almost 20 of them. I should only get back, I think it's 4? 4. So once again, query selector will select the HTML elements within the scope of the object you're calling it on, that you're calling that method on, right? So document.querySelector means, hey, I'm only going to select OL tags within the scope of document. On line 42, where I say const li's OL.querySelector, oh, we changed stuff up. Now I'm saying I only want to stack li tags in the scope of the OL element. I'll show you something kind of interesting. When this happens, if I show you this OL tag and we click the down arrow on it, actually I'm just going to, I have to dir this because the way this thing works. Query selector, it's going to grab the first query selector, there we go. Like any object I've told you before, there's properties and functions. It's very cool because if you use dir and spit it out, you can actually go see what those properties and functions are within your console. So a function is usually preceded by an F character. Looks like a little function character. That's how you know it's a function versus a property. But one thing you're going to notice, the node list is actually coming from here. When we do ol.querySelectorAll li, querySelectorAll grabs back all the child nodes, immediately looks for anything that is an li, and then returns it back. So you could also do ol.childNodes and grab all the child nodes back at once if you wanted to. Notice we're not limited to HTML elements. We also have these things called text, right? Texts are like little text nodes that are available to us. And they have a whole bunch of properties and methods to them as well. More on that in a bit. All right. Next, select all the p-HTML elements within the first section. All right, so if I want to select the first section, oh, hold on, there's a gotcha here. In the first section, HTML element using only a CSS selector. So we walk the DOM. Oh my God, moving anything in here is annoying. We walk the DOM using the query selector, but we don't necessarily have to because the argument that goes in here is just a CSS selector. And you already know how to walk the DOM with CSS selectors, thanks to Jessica or Scott. You can do that in here as well. So we could do const first section p's equals document dot query selector all. Anybody want to take a run at what the CSS selector would look like?
Section.
Yeah, section. We want the first one. First. We'll say first of type because it's probably one that you maybe have not used before. And how do I grab the paragraph tags under that?
It's like inside
Yep. And then a P. And that will grab all of the paragraph types into a node list under the first section, and there they are. And that's just using a CSS selector. So you can DOM walk with JavaScript or you can DOM walk with CSS. Either one works. Now, just a little out of the box thinking for those of you that like a little bit more advanced concepts. Remember dirty backticks? This is just a string. Dirty backticks allow us to do things like string interpolation, right? We could dynamically generate this at any point, which makes it very cool and very powerful for us if we want to dynamically put things on the screen and then dynamically grab them at any point. All right, so that's it for part one. So let's do lab part one. Let's go grab. So pull the lab down. Yeah, Nathaniel.
That the dirty backtick thing is that related to single page applications? Or is that a different thing?
I think you're thinking of like what, like Angular or something?
Yeah. Sounds kind of like what happens there.
Angular and things like that, they use something called a transpiler. So essentially what happens is you type out your code, right? And then it takes that page and it rips through it and replaces everything out with inline JavaScript functionality. Or it might even produce another page with JavaScript functionality.
Okay.
Is the way that works. So they have a parser that's always like an intermediary between what you get to your actual browser and what you have coded. There's like a
so
middle
there's a bit more
step.
steps between.
Yeah, there's a few more steps. It's like that with almost any transpiler. All right, so you want to open up the first lab, which you can find in the, not there, you can find in Blackboard. Sorry, it's not the first lab, it's the third lab. And I think I changed it up and it's now just under weekly learning because it makes sense to go there. All right, right here, weekly labs, lab 3. So go ahead and pull that down. And I believe the only thing you really need is the main.js file. Okay. And I would recommend opening up the index file inside your browser, which looks like file, open file. I don't know why I didn't open location already. I put mine on my desktop, Tuesday lab index. There you go, looks like that. Don't get scared. Not making you flip cards or shuffle or anything like that. Very, very simple stuff. All right, you're only going to complete those 3 steps in part 1. Should take you about 10 minutes. Not even. Hopefully not even 10 minutes. And you can work with people if you want to. Okay? Totally fine with that. You're welcome to work with the person beside you or the group at your table. So the first step will be select and store all the card values in your HTML page. So you're going to have to figure out how to store those cards, right? And you only want the card values, right? The next one is using walk the DOM. Select and store all the card values in the first UL. And then using walk the DOM, select and store all the card values in the second UL. And you can do either the CSS method or the scoped query selector method. Either one is fine. And then once you're done that, feel free to take a break. Go grab yourself coffee or something like that. And we will resume at 6:15. Easy peasy. Yep. That's my recommended method, yeah, because it's more efficient to use const. Yeah. Unless you're going to manipulate it. If you're going to change the value inside of it at any point, then no, don't. But you're like, even if you were to grab back an array of LS, right, you would have to physically remove one of the indexes and put something else in there. If you're going to do that, then definitely don't store them as const, because it'll just blow up. Yeah. It would have returned back every section. If you don't use that, you should get back every single paragraph that's under a section. You're not doing query selector all the time. You're doing query selector. Yeah.
So like that's what I thought, like if it's like the first section, so you're going to just do the query selector and it's gonna select the first one. So
The problem is it will only select the first instance of the first element that you were using in CSS. So if you did that, for example, if you did section greater than P, right, in CSS, you're going to select every single one, right, and immediately style them all. With query selector, it's only going to return back the first time it finds one. So if you got 20 on the page, it's only going to give you the first one. You can talk, it's not tests or anything like that. You are welcome to work as usual. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that was like that.
Yes.
It's totally up to you how you want to do it. I would recommend the class name is probably the easiest way to grab them all. But
So
yeah, you're gonna know this. Just ignore the stupid red instructions at the top. As long as it's in before Sunday, you're good.
Black values, you said. Next. The element.
I don't know why I said values. I just want the cards.
What? I already got that done.
Either one is fine. You're gonna get full marks for either one. So.
Alright, well I got both now pretty much.
How'd you do it? Out of curiosity, you did card style. That won't do what you want it to do. Yeah. Good idea, but you would almost have to do a map and then pull back all the text content. It would actually be a lot more complex. If you want to follow me, like follow what I'm saying legitimately, like literally, I'm only asking for the cards. I just want the cards back. So don't worry about the values. But if you wanted to pull the values as well, after your selector, you could add a dot map, right? Does anybody remember what map takes as its argument? It starts with a C. It does, yeah, a function. A callback function, right? You can write in function, or you can do a nice little arrow function if you wanted to. The function map passes in every element from its array, right? That's basically what map is doing. It's called an iterator. It goes through that array list and then immediately passes the element into the function, and then you can do whatever you want with that element. So I usually call it L. That's just my habit, right? And then I'm going to write my curly brace. And then map is looking for you to return something. So I'm going to return L dot what? What's that? Not quite, because is card element a form element? No, it's not. So it'd be text content. And then close your curly brace and your bracket, and you're done. So if you wanted to do it literally, you could add that chunk of code to the end of the document.query selector, and then that literally would return every value. Or just return the cards. That's totally fine. hashtag example. What is hashtag example? Right, so what that's going to return, it's going to return just this section. No, because it's like, all you want from me is the section element. That's all that is. So there's a few ways around that, but the easiest way to do it, actually I made it very simple. Go to the index. You could just query selector all and I'll return back every card. Yeah. And that will give you a node list of every single element that contains that thing. Yeah. Yep. You only need to go to step 3. Not step 4. Once we're done part 2 of this. Actually, the problem is when you do it this way, it takes a very long time. You want the element that contains hashtag first. Yeah, you won't get all the list items. They are technically there. You could use that and walk through and grab them to this list. So you use this, and then on the next line, you first card dot query selector dot card style, right? Or inside there you use CSS. So like all the card styles are first row. Inside the space. This element not only has the first row, it also has the last row.
I know how to do stuff. Sometimes I use the stuff to do things.
So when you first, I'll show you. Actually, if I do it the way that you guys were recommending before, and I grab document .query selector all hashtag first row. I get a node list back, but how many elements do I have? I have 1. It's a hard count. I have 1. I have 1 element that contains UL hashtag first row. How many card styles are under the first row? At least 5? I like that. Some? There's 7. Yeah, there's 7. So funny.
So this is the way,
So
this is the way you don't want us to do, or?
no, because you want to get all of those card styles. The step says, using walk the DOM, select and store all the card values in the first UL. So you've got the UL, but you don't have the card styles yet. You haven't actually stored those elements yet. To store those elements, there's 2 ways you could do it. You could do it this way, by using the selectors, right? Just like CSS, if I want to select all the LI elements inside that UL, I need to first select the parent UL and then go select all the children, right? That works. That brings back a node list of 7 elements. Or you can walk the DOM with JavaScript. I'm calling this query selector now on the returned element here. Oh, I do need all though. And that would have to be like that. So what that says is, using query selector, return the first instance of the hashtag first row, and then call .query selector all on this return, and go find all the card styles. Either one is totally acceptable. Or you can store the first one in a variable and then store the next one in a variable for all I care. That's totally fine too. But both are acceptable. And then for step 3, using walk the DOM, select and store all the card values in the second UL. That is as simple as literally copying and pasting what you did the first time. And then changing it out with second row, wherever you wrote first row. What's that? Yeah, till 6:15.
It says query selector all is going to function.
Then that means whatever you selected, or whatever you're trying to call query selector all on, is not, the method is not available to it. So my guess is you're trying to call query selector all on first row,
Yeah, like.
but you called first row using query selector all.
Yeah.
So this is what you've done. You've selected a node list, right? So now you have a node list that contains, right? And now you're saying, hey, call dot query selector all on this thing. And it's saying, dude, this is a node list. Which fucking one do you want me to call it on? Because I don't know, and I'm not going to call it on every single one of them. That's basically what it's saying. So you need to make sure that you only call this on an HTML element. It's not available on node lists. A way to double check things like that too, when you're trying to look and you're like, how do I know query selector all is available? You can always click the down arrow on the node list and click the down arrow on Proto. And if you look, Proto only has a few things available to it, right? But if I grab this first UL, it's got lots of stuff. And I can go find query selector all, which is, it's somewhere in here. I'm not sure where it is actually. Query selector. Oh, I think I had it and then I lost it. It's in there somewhere. I'm not sure where I got it from. Yeah. Yeah, you'll get one back.
Okay.
Yeah, because dot query selector will only ever return back one HTML element.
Question for you. Why would it be giving
Go back to it. So that's saying that you're missing your parentheses after your selector list. I can get the query selector. That's fine. What row was that on? If you click on this little thing, it'll show you exactly what that is. Oh, it's actually on the console log. Yeah, because you're putting things in here you don't have comments. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
So you're saying comes first row, comes first row, you're saying about the first row because you go into here, first row, second row, so you're using those. Back here, you're saying one, first row, second row, and you're asking just one person, just this first row. Saying query selector all of that first row, alright, stop. Come into here, first off, first off, first off. Saying I want all first off.
And not all those Airbnb
So the one way was to do it this way, right? Where you grab it like this. The other way was this way with the CSS.
Okay.
So I'm grabbing the first row section, space, and all the card styles.
And that's basically the exact same.
It's exactly the same as the other one.
Okay.
One's using JavaScript to walk the DOM, the other one's using CSS.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna get one.
So, this one, is it okay?
Section for some type UL. Yeah, that's
So that's the section. And you'll grab the first two, you'll grab all the ULs. Based on that selector, you'll grab all the ULs that are underneath that section.
So,
The other thing is too
But
is
isn't
this
it person
space,
type?
this space will blow up. Because this is a pseudo selector, which means that has to be buttoned up and instead.
Okay, so,
What this says is, go grab the first section you find.
yeah,
This says, grab direct children underneath this section, and you're saying grab all the UL
So-
direct childs of the section.
so what I really want is this.
Ooh, yeah, that's nice. That's different than what other people do.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally.
I'm pretty sure it's JavaScript.
The first step is
That'll just grab the any element that has example on it.
I have to walk the same way as I did.
Yeah.
The top one.
Now the cool thing is you don't necessarily need to start at example. If you go back to the index, you could start at first row.
Then I have to
Yeah. There's step 1 and step 2. Oh, what are you doing? The first step?
Yeah.
Of grabbing all the things? Oh, the easiest. There's such an easy way to do that. Just grab all the card stops.
I got to indulge in this walk the dog.
Yeah, 2 minutes. The second one looks, yeah, that's right.
Is it this, we're getting all the things. That's-
That works.
That works, right?
That works.
That works.
Pizza Hut Tuesday today. Every Tuesday on my way home I stop because it's $7.99 for Pizza Hut, which is dirt cheap for Pizza Hut.
What?
$7.99 for a medium pizza.
Oh, that's pretty sweet.
That is so cheap for pan fried
Which
pizza.
toppings though?
2. Whatever 2 you want.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not too bad. You have to buy 2 of them though, that's the only thing. Because
That's
it's
okay.
Game of
2 mediums at $7.99. Yeah, exactly.
That's several kids. That's
No, it's not for that. This is for me and my wife. I'm gonna take some to work tomorrow. But yeah. I usually grab 2, or well, I usually grab 1 pizza for $8.99, but they're on for $7.99. And then I go over to Burger King and I grab the $2.99 chicken nuggets, the buffalo dip. Makes perfect. Pizza and nuggets. Heartburn, stomach ache.
Follow it up with Tom's chaser.
So
just drink green tea.
Ah.
Like, and that'll.
I heard somebody over that way.
What's the bit of money you can actually pay?
Yeah, we're not even on that.
It's pretty sweet. It's
That does look good.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's like,
for so long.
yeah, you can do it.
Oh, true,
I
yeah.
don't really care how you iterate through it,
I know.
but there is a quick reason. Somebody,
A subscription service or anything?
Oh, really?
Yes, HelloFresh.
just a question tree, and
So
then we'll do
you
the
get, you know, your meals, like the right amount of stuff, and it's just like, knock on your door.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, by the time I like look up a recipe, find all the ingredients, find that ingredient.
Yeah.
Then you might like end up with like the cayenne pepper, and then you.
It's hard to say now.
Yeah.
I do like cayenne pepper.
I only assumed it was.
But this way at least I can try a fair number of.
You can't do drop that.
Keep the ones I like, but those are the regular.
Like,
No, it's technically an election,
Yeah.
it does operate with a lot of the array things. We could override the
And they
prototype
have like,
make it equal to the
like,
function array.
regular
Give it.
menus pick. They have like 7 or 8 options for each one. I get 3 of those.
Maybe we'll do that next week, we'll take a look at doing that. Gotta write our own prototype. Turns out this .map function that I wrote here does not work because it's a node list. It's not technically an array. It is its own thing. This method is not available on it, unfortunately. So there are ways that we could iterate through and do the same kind of thing, or we could actually override the prototype method and add our own new prototype method, but I think that's a little advanced for today's class. So we'll do that another time. Anyways, we should move on. We have a whole other section to do. If you want to open up part 2, so go to week 8 and download the starter DOM for part 2. We'll kind of bulldoze through this a little bit quickly, but at least it'll give you a chance to work on the lab parts. So as I stated before, HTML elements and HTML collections and node lists, HTML elements are all objects. So are HTML collections, so are node lists. Believe it or not, this is going to blow your brain a little bit. Arrays in JavaScript are objects. Variables in JavaScript are objects. Strings are objects. Numbers are objects. Booleans are objects. Almost everything in JavaScript is wrapped by an object of some sort, which means you can literally call dot on almost everything you type in JavaScript. Yes, Ali?
Where's that code that makes them object live?
That's the DOM. That is the big and beautiful DOM and the JavaScript API, and it lives in your browser. That's where it's living currently. So what's giving us all that functionality is the engine that we're currently working with, right? So if we're using Chrome, does anybody remember what that engine is? No, it's not Chromium, but you're on the right track. That's interesting that you know that word. Does anybody know? Yeah, it's the V8. That's right. Not the terrible fruit juice, but the actual engine. Though I do like V8. It's the one drink I can guarantee to always be in the fridge because nobody else in my house will drink it. Out of 9 people, I'm the only one that does. So it's fantastic. Right, so the V8 engine is what powers Chrome. It's what gives us our JavaScript API, and it's their implementation of the JavaScript API. There is a specification, right? And everybody has to follow that specification. Those specifications are what you guys have seen as ECMA. Right? ECMA is the standard. It provides a specification that says if you want to be ECMA 6 compliant, you must have .map, .filter, .reduce. They must work off arrays. They must work in this way, and they must return this. However you do that behind the scenes is totally up to you. Like whatever you want to do in the background to make that as efficient as possible is completely up to you. That's why if you benchmark some of the methods that are available in JavaScript in Chrome versus, say, Firefox, some of the methods are faster in Chrome and some of the methods are faster in Firefox. And it's all because of their implementation. But what you can rely on is that .map is in both, .replace is in both. You don't need to give 2 shits on how it's implemented as long as it's there. That's all you need to really rely on. Incidentally, if you ever do video game development, the same thing applies to your video cards. The way they implement graphics on your video card is the same idea. They follow the standardization. How they actually deal with it in the background is totally up to them, right? So, the same thing goes with those particular DOM things. Array is an object, string is an object, number is an object. These things are all objects. HTML elements are an object. It is no different than the objects you create in object-oriented programming. They are no different than the objects you instantiate, okay? Don't think classes, just think of what you wind up with when you instantiate a class. That's the thing. That's the thing you get. That's the thing you're working with at all times. The DOM represents our entire HTML page from top to bottom. It's our whole document in an object. Okay? It provides, like objects do, properties and methods that allow us to create, read, update, and delete various pieces of our HTML page. The HTML page is an object the HTML element is an object representing your HTML tag. The HTML collection is a collection of HTML elements. Okay? Like an array, but it is not an array, not specifically. This includes all the HTML element nodes and text nodes that may be a part of the collection. So when you get that node list, It contains every single possible node that meets your criteria. Okay? Node lists are not just returned from query selector. That children nodes, if you access children nodes on an element, it returns back a node list. And that node list will contain text, it will contain li tags, span tags, whatever happens to be in there. Okay? Most things in JavaScript are objects. Objects have properties and methods. This is a very important concept you need to understand. There is no magic here. The way an object exists in JavaScript is the same as the way an object exists in any programming language. The only difference is that object never actually got instantiated like it did based on a class in another language. It just existed. The second you decided to define it, you brought it into existence, you birthed it life, you gave it meaning and purpose. Okay? That's basically how that works. It's a little deep for 6:30, but whatever. Objects. In standard object-oriented programming, classes are created as blueprints, which you guys already knew, of attributes and functionality. The attributes and functionality are better known as properties and methods. If we want a subset of those, we do inheritance, right? Next week, we're going to look at prototypal inheritance, which is how we do inheritance in JavaScript. However, JavaScript does not use classes. It uses object prototypes exclusively. Yes, I know about the ECMAScript class, for those of you smart ones that are like, oh, dude, it's got classes. It does, but dude, they're technically wrapping prototypes, so forget it. And it's something that you will encounter in Node more than you will encounter in client-side, right? Create a new object. So, however, JavaScript doesn't use classes, it uses object, blah, blah, blah. I already said that. Let's create an object. That makes more sense. Let's do that. So, in step 1 of our main JS, we're going to create a new object that is called person. And because I might manipulate this object and change it, I am going to use the let modifier. This curly braces that you see here, they're called an object literal. What it basically means is I literally want to create an object. That's essentially what I'm saying to the JavaScript interpreter. I'm saying, hey, person is an object. It's a literal object. Let's give it a name and some age and perhaps a gender. All right, so I'm going to say the name is Sean. I'm going to say the age is 39 and the gender is male, not spelt like the mail service. I didn't mean it that way. That postal service, not mail service. All right. So these are properties, right? You guys have created properties before. You know what properties are. If I want to access name, I just call person.name, and I can access name. If I want to access age, person.age. If I want to access gender, person.gender. I don't think this even differs all that much from Java, actually, on how this is done. In PHP, it is very different. In Ruby, it is very similar. All right, step 3. Give your object, oh, don't forget these little commas. You need these commas because what we're basically defining is keys and values. That's what's going inside our object little. Key, value, key, value, key, value. Who's programmed JSON before or worked with JSON? Cool. So if you look at a JSON, right, it's the same thing. Key, value, key, value, key, value. Right? Same thing with this. This object is literally keys and values, and that's what we need. We have to have keys and values. So my key is name. Can I have 2 keys named name? In a class, can you have 2 properties called name? No, blows up, right? Because you get symbol collisions. Same thing with the object here. You cannot have 2 keys named name. You cannot have 2 keys named age or 2 keys named gender. They must be unique. They have to be unique. Step 3, give your object a function. What? I can put a function in here? That's pretty badass. So let's do it. Give your function a called greeting. Okay. So we're going to make greeting. We literally just embed an anonymous function right in here. And I'm just going to say console.log. And you can write whatever greeting you want. But I'm going to use some dirty backticks. Write hello, and then my name is, and I'm going to use some parsing. And in order to access name, how would I do this in a class? How would I access a property of a class inside the class? There's a very powerful keyword. This. This is probably one of the most powerful keywords you'll ever work with. This dot name says, hey, in the context of this thing between these curly braces, I want to access that thing right there. And I am this dot age years old. I mean, that's kind of a bizarre greeting. How many people do you meet and say, hello, I'm Sean, I'm 39? Yeah, it's not very often. We missed a step and nobody caught it. Give your object a name, age, gender, and an array of interests. And I didn't give it an array of interests. Let's do that now. Interests. Long walks on the beach. Programming. Giving people my age. It's the little things. How's that for blowing your mind a little bit? I can put arrays in here. That's awesome. You're like, yeah, you can do that in classes too. Come on. But this isn't a class. It's an object. This is an object immediately. This would be closer to a struct. That would be the closest thing I can think of that it would be to. It would be a struct. All right, step 4. Now I need a comma. We can't forget these commas. Make sure you add the comma after your function definition there. Otherwise it will blow up. Step 4, give your object a function called bio and have it output their name, age, gender, and interest in a logical sentence. I like that I wrote logical sentence. All right, bio, function. Here we go. Console.log. Some dirty backticks. Not the tab, but dirty backticks. There we go. $sign. What do I need to access my name? This. Dot name, that's right, is a this dot age, year old, this dot gender, who is interested in $sign, and we're going to make this really goofy, this dot interests dot, and we're going to use that wonderful method join. How many of you actually still remember join? Not very many. All right, join, space, and space. Dot. What's that going to do to the array? Yep, and between each value? And, exactly. We're definitely going to need our console up for this. Now, if I go console.log after my curly brace, my closing curly brace here, I'm just going to scroll up a little bit. Console.log, and I console.log out person. As you can see, I get the object over here in the console, and if I click the down arrow, you can see all the different things, and you can see the little F beside my functions, right, because it tells me that. If I wanted to see what kind of object this is, I can do dot constructor. .name and save it, and it tells me it's an object. Okay, so we did create an object. That thing says so. You still typing, or can I scroll a little bit? Can I scroll past name, age, gender, and interests? I'm going to scroll to there. All right. So now to call the greeting, how would I call a method on an object in Java? Say I had a method called person and I wanted to call greeting on it. What would my syntax look like? Dot what?
Dot operator.
Dot operator? It's not just person dot greeting? That's not how it's done? When I want to call a method in Java? Oh, really? That's annoying. All right, in every other normal language on the planet, it would be something like this. person.greeting. And person.greeting will call the function inside here and immediately output. If it was PHP, it'd be thin arrow greeting. If it's Ruby, it's dot. C++ is dot. Nope, yes, it's dot. I'm going to scroll up a little bit, just a little bit. To call the bio, what do you think I do? Person.bio, exactly. With, don't forget those little parentheses. Sean is a 39-year-old male who is interested in comics and programming and movies. And the word "and" by the looks of it. The worst thing to try to grab a hold of here. The last thing is I want to output the name and the age, and it is not difficult to do this at all. It's just simply console.log person, spelled correctly, .name with no parentheses because it's not a function, and person.age. And there we get Sean and 39. And that is an object. Now it is slightly different. It's very, very specific, isn't it? It's a very specific object to Sean only, even though we called it person. But it doesn't have to be. We could make it a lot more generic. And we could have things inherit from it. Yep.
So instead of doing two console.logs, you can just take person.age and put it out in person.name? Same bubble?
You mean like a comma? So you could do comma person.age, like so. Yep, you can certainly do that. That is correct. Console.log takes a argument list. You just give it as many things as you want. The cool thing about that, though, is it keeps them as what they are. So if you have two arrays, it will actually give you two array structures, and you can click the little arrows and see both of them. And it doesn't like convert them to a string or anything, which is kind of cool. HTML element properties and methods. An HTML element, as I've said before, is an object that represents your HTML tag. In HTML, a tag describes its content. For example, article tells the browser that the content contained inside is semantically connected to an article. You guys did HTML semantics, right? That's the reason why HTML5 now exists, so that we can say, this is an article, not just a blob on a page. It's an actual article. This is a section of that article. This is the heading in that article. Here's the footer. Right? We now have the ability to tell it semantically, that's what that means. This thing has meaning, semantically what we want it to mean. JavaScript doesn't care about semantics. It's like, dude, doesn't matter to me. You want to use a div or article, it doesn't matter. They're all HTML elements to me. But it does care about the tag name. Every HTML tag will become an HTML element in the DOM. In addition, the HTML element inherits properties and methods from various other objects around it, such as element, node, and event target in that order. We literally go, if I grab the HTML span element, I start with the HTML span element. Then I come up a level to its inheritance, which it inherits from HTML element. HTML element inherits from element, I think. Yeah, element. Element inherits from node. Node inherits from the event target. And everybody inherits from the event target. They all come from the event target. The event target, in case some of you are like, I've heard that before. The event target is literally the thing that you add your event listeners to. That's where it starts from. This means we have many properties and methods available to us to work with our HTML element. There's tons of things that we can do with our HTML element. Not only just binding events to it, we can also change its styling, we can change its font type, we can remove it, we can add it back, we can hide it, we can move it around the page, we can do whatever we want to our HTML element. We are not restricted. That's the cool thing about JavaScript. So we can go through these things, select and store the H1, change the text content of the H1, change the text color of the H1, and make the H1 object text upper. Yeah, let's do those very, very fast. So to select and store, it is, only because I want to see this, const h1 equals, I'm only selecting just an HTML element, so I need to use which query selector? Just the selector, that's right, because I want just the HTML element back. Go. To change the text, does anybody remember the property I have to call? Text content, that's correct. What does text content return? What data type? That is correct. And because it returns a string, and strings are objects, I literally have all string methods and properties available to me on that string. Which means I can call style on text content, I can call whatever I want on text content, as long as it's a string method. Change the text color of the h1 element object. So the h1 element up here is called I changed this, because I just did that. And now I want to change it to pink. So I'm going to call h1.style. Style is a property that's available on this HTML element. All HTML elements have the style property on them. The style property is your direct link to the CSS available for this. What's cool, though, is the style thing creates this whole block of properties that are representations of the actual style in CSS. It just does something weird to them. So for example, if I want to change the background color of this particular thing, I can call .background color. So I drop the dash and I immediately capitalize the next letter. And I make it equal to something. So I'll just make it equal to pink. And there it goes. It adds the background color of pink to it. If I want to just change the color of the text, I would just call color. And that changes it to pink. And like I said, because h1.textContent is a string, that's what it returns is a string, and we have string as an object that has properties and methods, there's a method on the string objects called toUppercase, right? We've used that before, and to lowercase, right? That is a method that's available to us. So I can actually call that now. And that will make the whole thing uppercase. And you may be like, well, why couldn't you just call h1.textContent.toUppercase? Does anybody know why I can't do that? Text content can only receive a string. Can only receive a string, and it's only assignable. That's all it's allowed to do is assign it. If you call toUppercase, it will do it. It will uppercase the text. You just won't see it because you haven't assigned it. So you have to actually do this kind of thing twice, unfortunately. You have to reference it and then assign your change. So that last statement is kind of interesting because it's actually a whole whack of objects all in one. It's the h1 is an object, right? What kind of object is it? It's an HTML element. That is perfectly correct. Text content is an object. What kind of object is it?
String.
It's a string. Yeah. I was like waving a string in the air. Yeah. It's a string object. That is correct. Which is actually also a text node object. It inherits from a whole bunch of places as well. The text node object inherits from string, which is an object. That is why we have access to the string method toUppercase. This whole line contains a lot of objects giving us a lot of capability. We're not even talking about the inherited objects. There's a whole whack of inherited objects. And you're like, dude, I can't remember all of that. There's no way I can remember all of that. You don't need to remember all of that. There's no reason to, because you can always look it up. If you go to MDN, this is a fantastic resource for this type of stuff. If you go to MDN and you type in HTML element, it nicely tells you everything it inherits from in a cool little list at the top. HTML element inherits from element, which inherits from node, which inherits from inventory. But I'm never going to write that on a test. I'm never going to ask you, what does HTML element inherit from? And expect you to write it down, because I don't give a damn. And you shouldn't either. The only thing you should care about is that HTML element allows you to add event listeners, such as clicks, which makes sense, right? If you think about it, it makes logical sense. I can click on this button. I can click this paragraph. I can interact with my HTML page. So if I can interact with my HTML page, it makes perfect sense that events are available to it. Only on those things, okay? Let's go back to wherever the hell I was. That's part 1. I'm guessing this is part 2. This leads to another important concept. Like I said, in JavaScript, a variable property value can be any type. Okay? A variable value or a property value can be of any type. You're not limited, right? In Java, you need to state this thing is this. So we can only accept a value of this data type, right? In C++, same thing. That variable is type string. It can only accept strings. You are not allowed to put anything else in there. However, in JavaScript, that's not the case. It's not strict, right? You can put whatever you want as a value into a variable or a property. This is going to blow your mind a little bit because objects are all moved by reference, right? That reference can be the value of any property. That's why you wind up with crazy, crazy inception like this. There's the body tag, right? Here we go. We have body. These are all our properties, right? Oh, here we go. We've got child nodes. Let's click on child nodes. Cool. Well, wait. There's a whole bunch of things in here. Let's go find the div container, right? That's part of our HTML structure. Oh, and it's got child nodes. Oh, and there's the header. And it's got child nodes as well. Oh, there's the H1.
I noticed that when I was checking things on the assignment.
And it's got child nodes. Its child node is text. With the value, I changed this. These are all being passed by reference. These are not copies sitting inside there, right? They're all references. So you can crawl your way up and down through the DOM and change various things in the DOM and affect various things in the DOM all because of the fact that it's all connected by reference. That makes the DOM stupid, wicked powerful. Very, very cool, and allows you to do some very cool things. All right, so obviously we're not going to be able to complete today. I have only like 2 minutes of stuff left. That's not true. It's probably about 30 minutes of stuff left. So we will do part 2 of the lab. The lab is not due Sunday. I will extend that. We have part 2 of the lab, which we'll do at the beginning of next class, and then I'll make that lesson a little shorter. That's all. All right. Have a great week.